as you know, that we are celebrating the 75th year of independence, and in doing so, we are remembering the great scientific minds of the pre-independence era. So there's a series of lecture, and this is the, I think, the 7th installment of that lecture, which will be given on the great statistician and kind of the picture of the statistical notion of this country, Professor Chandra. And to speak on Professor Mahalanobis, we are very pleased to have Professor Partha Majumder, who had been long associated with India Statistical Institute, the institution developed by Professor Prasanta. So I request our director, Professor Partha, to kindly introduce the speaker.
Very good afternoon, both offline and online attendees of this seminar on Prasanta Chandra Mahalanobis. As has been already mentioned, that we are celebrating as a part of Ajadi Answer this series of talks on illustrious scientists in the pre-independence era, and which started with the talk on Professor Shutendranath Bose, and we had talk even on Meghan Shah, on Viva Chaudhary, on C.V. Raman, and today the talk is on Prasanta Mahalanobis. And about the speaker, so I think no one will be a better candidate to give this talk, because he did his BStat, MStat, as well as PhD from Indian Statistical Institute, which was founded by Mr. Prasanta Chandra Mahalanobis. And Professor Majumder is not an unknown face, I guess, in this center. Because a while ago, he gave the talk, which was a Bose colloquium on genetics in Asia. So there the topic was different. But again, that was basically use of different statistical analysis about the genetics, which is his field of research. So he used statistical tools to analyze and do studies on human genome and genetics. He is the founder director of the National Institute on Biomedical Genetics in Kolkata. He has, of course, many accolades. The list is long, but those of you who watch Char Anando must have seen very recently he has been honored with Shiravanali. Must have seen him in television. And he has, of course, in recent time, the New Millennium Prize, the Ranbaxy Award, the Tirla Award, and of course, he is the fellow of all three Indian academies. And Prasanta Mahalanobis, who is the father of the modern Indian statistics, the whole era started with this person. And even, a person who is not really working with statistics, I guess we all know of the concept of Mahalanobis distance. It's become something which almost everyone knows. So this is a great occasion because we are going to have the talk on Prasanta Chandra Mahalanobis, who has written several articles on Prasanta Chandra Mahalanobis, who himself is a practicing statistician. So this is something that
Good afternoon. I'm absolutely delighted and pleased to be called upon to give this talk. As you have just heard, my life is intimately connected with the Indian Statistical Institute that was established by Chandra Mahalanobis. He is, of course, an architect of statistical science and also of our national development, which is the reason why it's important to remember him during this 75th year of Indian independence. Prasanta Chandra Mahalanobis founded the Indian Statistical Institute, as I said. He was born in 1893 and passed away in 1972. I have been fortunate to have been a student. He didn't take many classes, but he did take a few classes for us. So I can't vouch that he was a great teacher because the number of classes that he took, and he was already quite aged at the time when he came into our class. But subsequently, I have done a lot of reading about him, of the various things that he had written about our nation. So I feel quite confident to be able to give this talk without playing down on any of the various things that he has done. He was in some ways a polymath, as you can see. The first thing that I want to remember is that he was a firm believer that scientific and rational views lay the foundations of modern age. And this is what he wrote. The transformation of all the advanced or rapidly advancing countries has been brought about by the acceptance of a scientific and rational view of life and nature. This is the foundation of modern age. So as you can see that he upheld a rational thought and scientific views, and this is one reason why we should remember him particularly today. If he did nothing else but founded the Indian Statistical Institute, his name would be etched in the annals of science. He did many other things, as a matter of fact. When the Indian Statistical Institute was set up, it was set up in 1931. In the United States, there was not even one single institute of statistics. The first institute in the United States that was set up, and we say this with a matter of pride, that ISI, the Indian Statistical Institute, was adopted as a model for the first institute of statistics that was established in the US at the Research Triangle Park in North Carolina by Mary Fox. The Indian Statistical Institute, to the economist I.G. Patel, who was subsequently also the governor of the Reserve Bank of India, has many currency notes signed by him. This is the book that he has written, and this is what he wrote in the book when he visited ISI, and he visited ISI multiple times. He said that it resembled an ancient Gurukul set in sylvan surroundings, a cocktail of disarming hospitality, famed intellects, and erudite debate amidst a context of national importance. So this is what ISI was, and this is what ISI, to a certain extent, still remains. I will, of course, not spend too much time about what ISI has done, but more about what Mahalanobis has done. But in the same context, ISI will come multiple times. His encounter, Mahalanobis' encounter with statistics was by chance. In 1912, he passed his BSc with honors in physics from the Presidency College, Kolkata, and left for England to study at the King's College in Cambridge. 1915, he completed his tripos, returned home for a short vacation. He was to go back and work with C.T.R. Wilson of Cloud Chamber fame. The war intervened and he never went back. He was then asked to teach physics at the Presidency College. In 1922, he became a professor of physics at the Presidency College and served until 1948. At that time, just before he was going to leave for India in 1915, he had a tutor, Macaulay, in the King's College in Cambridge, and Macaulay drew his attention to Biometrica, the only journal, the only professional journal that dealt with quantitative biology, which was the foundation of all of modern statistics. even though gambling may be called as the foundation of statistics, but when we talk about statistics, we talk about modern statistics, and essentially modern statistics arose from quantitative biology, or large segments of modern statistics arose from quantitative biology. And this was the paper, this was a journal that used to be published on quantitative biology. It said a journal for the statistical study of biological problems, and it was edited by Weldon and Carl Pearson. Carl Pearson's name will appear one more time or a couple of more times during my talk, and would like you to remember that he was the editor of Biometric at that time. Mahalanobis got hold of this particular issue that was presented to him by my colleague, and he liked the papers that were published in that particular issue, and then he was to set out on this long voyage, ship voyage to India, and he actually procured a whole set of volumes of Biometrica that was published up until then, and he read those papers, or the papers that were published in those volumes, on his way. On the voyage was about 3 months on his long voyage back to India, and that became his passion, his interest, and he contributed so much to modern statistics. So when he returned, when he became a professor of physics or joined the physics department in Presidency College, because of his understanding of statistics, he set up a statistical laboratory in the Presidency College, and in 1931 moved the statistical laboratory to found the Indian Statistical Institute in Mahalanobis in 1931. So it was the foundation of the Indian Statistical Institute was actually in the statistical laboratory at the Presidency College. When he joined the Presidency College, Acharya Brajendranath Seal was the professor and head of the Department of Philosophy in Calcutta University. And later, Acharya Seal went as Vice Chancellor to Madras University, but that's much later. At that time, Professor Seal was also in charge of the examinations of Calcutta University, and he wanted to understand over the years of teaching, and he wanted to calibrate teaching with the performance of the students, and therefore he wanted to do this by analyzing the marks that the students were getting in the examination. And so what he entrusted Mahalanobis with, he requested him to analyze the marks that were obtained over the years by the various students of various examinations of the Calcutta University. His goal was to calibrate the performance of the education system within the Calcutta University, both in terms of teaching and in terms of learning. So that was one first thing that Mahalanobis did. I'm not going to get into the results, but that was the first exposure to data in India, to data and actual analysis of data. Prasanta Mahalanobis was, of course, greatly influenced by Rabindranath. In 1910 was the first time that Mahalanobis met with Rabindranath. Again, I'm not going to go through all of the various kinds of relationship that he and Nirmal Kumari, his wife, had with Rabindranath, but they had a very intimate relationship. On November 6, 1916, while describing his 1910 encounter to Rani Mahalanobis, he said life was rekindled by the touch of Rabindranath. And when you see translation mind, I actually have done quite a bit of research on various aspects of Mahalanobis, and I've written about them. So for this particular talk, this is written in Bengali to his wife, and I had to translate that. And you will see several of those in my talk. And he went on to say that my introduction to Rabindranath's writings were almost simultaneous with my introduction to alphabets. Again, like I said, that I'm not going to talk about the relationship of Rabindranath and Mahalanobis in any great detail, because that itself is a separate talk. I just want to point out that Mahalanobis actually drafted the first constitution of Vishwabharati, and was also the first secretary for Moshoji jointly with Rabindranath when Vishwabharati was formed in 1921. Subsequently, there was a fallout that I will mention, won't get into the details of the fallout. So on January 15, 1931, the year that Indian Statistical Institute was set up, he actually wrote to Rani Mahalanobis, and it's very interesting that he talks about unity of races, and this unity of races um, uh, was to impact on the kind of work that he actually had done later. He said, I cannot see anyone enthusiastic about the poet's repeated appeal for a global union. And as many of you would know, Rabindranath was actually appealing to the world about a global union in various writings and in speeches that he delivered in India and outside of India. I don't know about other matters, but in the matter of unity of races, perhaps the poet's ideal will never be established in Vishwabharati in spite of his efforts. So this was kind of a lament that while Rabindranath was talking about unity of races and global union, Mahalanobis was unable to see that it was having any major impact, and he laments the fact in the same year that he was establishing the Indian Statistical Institute. I said that although he was, he drafted the constitution of Vishwabharati, he was the first secretary of Vishwabharati, and he was also instrumental in various other ways. His father was, a founder of the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj, and Sadharan Brahmo Samaj did not want to offer membership to Rabindranath Tagore, and that battle went on for some years until Sukumar Rai, Satish Rai's father, and Chandra Mahalanobis, they took up the cause, and they provided a logical argumentation as to why Rabindranath Tagore should be admitted to the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj, and they wrote this booklet. Chandra Mahalanobis wrote this booklet, Kano Rabindranath Ke Chai. Not all that I'm trying to give you are glimpses of the kind of things that Mahalanobis had done along with Rabindranath or for Rabindranath. He resigned from Vishwabharati in August of 1929, and again, there is some analysis as to why he resigned. So some of it was because he was unable to see the various things that Rabindranath was actually preaching and proposing, propounding, that was not actually was not settling down on the ground, such as global union and unity of races. However, after having, and there is some analysis as to why his relationship was with Rabindranath was not really something to write home about. And Rabindranath, in a letter written on 7th March 1931, again the year Indian Statistical Institute was established, reminded the readers that to Prasanta Chandra, Rabindranath and Vishwabharati are two different entities. By differentiating them, Prasanta Chandra derives great pleasure. Please remember that there was the first secretaries of Vishwabharati were two. It was not one secretary, but two secretaries, joint secretaries, Prasanta Chandra Mahalanobis and Rabindranath Tagore. And there's not very much of written documentation as to what may have transpired between the two of them, but there is some amount of documentation, and this is one which I sort of discovered, where it's quite clear that the relationship between the two of them was not very good. Whatever he means by the fact that, or by his understanding that Chandra had some kind of passion towards Rabindranath and some kind of another kind of passion towards Vishwabharati, and the two didn't jive very well. Be that as it may, he probably Chandra thought that his life was going to be in Vishwabharati, but ultimately it was not to be, and he was probably seeking emancipation and institution. So ultimately, the Indian Statistical Institute was born. So, like I said, that if he didn't do anything else but just founded the Indian Statistical Institute, his name would remain etched in the annals of science, but he didn't make much more. He propounded this particular, or proposed, formulated a measure of distance, which is called d squared. I'm not going to give you formulas, etc., but d squared is now used in various domains of science, from manufacturing to quality control to measurement of physical differences and so on and so forth. So Mahalanobis d squared is a statistic that's ubiquitously used. How did it appear, or how did he formulate the statistic? Again, all of these are chance happenings, and much of it happens by chance. He attended the Indian Science Congress in 1920 that was held in Nagpur, and he met the director of the Zoological Survey of India, whose name was Nelson Hernandez. Nelson Hernandez requested Mahalanobis. Nelson Hernandez was actually intrigued by the physical resemblance of or physical positioning of Anglo-Indians of Calcutta or Anglo-Indians of India, and was wondering whether the Anglo-Indians who were born between somebody of European descent and somebody of Indian descent, where would the Anglo-Indians lie? Would they be closer to the Europeans or closer to the Indians? So that was so the kind of admixture between somebody of European descent and somebody of Indian descent that resulted in this entire subpopulation of Anglo-Indians was enigmatic to Nelson Hernandez, and he asked Mahalanobis if he could sort this out, if he could resolve the puzzle by looking at physical dimensions of Anglo-Indians vis-a-vis the physical dimensions of people of European descent and people of native Indian descent. And Mahalanobis actually did a lot of studies, took a lot of measurements on Anglo-Indians, did a lot of statistical analysis, and this was character by character. So this was mean stature. He looked at and analyzed the data and came to certain kinds of conclusions. And he called this is part one, anthropological observations on the Anglo-Indians of Calcutta, and it was followed by a series of papers on various kinds of body dimensions. While he was doing this, while he was looking at these kinds of things, Carl Pearson, who you will recall was the editor of Biometrica that introduced statistics to Mahalanobis, Carl Pearson already was thinking about these problems and was trying to measure, conceptual difference between two races, so to say. And he proposed, Carl Pearson had proposed what's called the coefficient of racial likeness. So how similar were two races based on physical dimensions? And he looked at various kinds of data, and one of the studies that he did, along with a collaborator of his or a student of his, was studying the Burmese skull. Based on skull measurements, they were trying to find out where Burma is placed relative to other kinds of races, etc. And that was published in the Biometrica. And it's in that context that Pearson produced this particular statistic called coefficient of racial likeness. Mahalanobis was to use this particular coefficient, but he soon realized the shortcomings of this coefficient. So, don't read the whole thing. It was probably a test of divergence between two samples rather than a measure of the actual magnitude of the divergence. So, what it means is that if you use the coefficient of racial likeness, this is dependent on the sample size. If you have two groups and you're trying to measure the similarities or dissimilarities of the two groups, given a reasonable number of samples from each of the two groups, as you increase the sample size, that should stabilize, it should become an asymptote. This does not happen with CRL, and that was a big bother for Mahalanobis. He said that it's not even measuring the true magnitude of the similarity between these two groups, because as you increase the sample size, the statistic changes, and it just keeps changing as you increase the sample size. So this can't be a good measure of similarity or distance between two groups, and that's when he actually formulated, got an idea, formulated d squared. I'm not even giving you the formula, but I'm only telling you the context, how Mahalanobis landed up or propounded the d squared statistic, because he was at unease with CRL, with the coefficient of racial likeness. One of the first applications that he made was in 1925, analysis of race mixture in Bengal. And I'll come back. And this was also the formal statistic, and the derivation of the properties was actually published in the Journal of the Asiatic Society of Bengal. That time it used to be called the Asiatic Society of Bengal. Today it's called the Asiatic Society number 1, Park Street. That's the building. In 1930, that's where it was published. And this also has an interesting history that I discovered, again, rummaging through the papers of Mahalanobis. And I actually published this on the 125th birth anniversary of the Asiatic Society, no, not of the Asiatic Society, of Mahalanobis. And essentially, I just want to read out one line. He actually sent this paper that was ultimately published in the Journal of the Asiatic Society of Bengal. He actually sent it out to Carl Pearson, requesting him to publish in Biometrica. It wasn't published. It was sent to Carl Pearson in 1929 for Biometrica, but the paper was not accepted for publication. Ultimately, it was published in the Journal of Asiatic Society of Bengal, and one of the most seminal papers ever, most cited papers ever in the Journal of the Asiatic Society is this particular paper, Mahalanobis, the squared statistic. Then he went on to do a few more things. He again wanted to understand how well the square performs, and he actually wanted to use this on certain real data and some real problems. And again, the chance meeting with an anthropologist by name D.N. Majumder, who was interested in figuring out, so in India we have various tribal populations, we have the caste populations. Caste populations are also hierarchically arranged with Brahmins at the top. That's a social structure, whether we believe it or not. But anyway, one of the things that Majumder was trying to understand is that can we recapitulate the hierarchy of the caste and also find out what the relationship of these caste groups were with the tribal groups, using certain body dimensions and using certain measures of distance among these. And of course, Mahalanobis had already just then propounded, not just then, about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, propounded the squared statistic, and then he went on to utilize this, apply this. And again, what I'm going to do is to tell you the this is a statistical study of the United Provinces, UP, Uttarakhand, and all of that combined. And what the study design was that they selected a large number of groups, arranged in hierarchy, also a large number of groups, tribal groups, and some groups whose positioning was not even known. Sociologists were not sure about the positioning, social positioning of these groups. So they selected 2 Brahmin groups, 4 artisan groups, and 8 tribal groups. And there were speculations that some groups were, as a result of admixture of some other groups, and similarly, the tribal groups and the artisan groups probably admixed in order to produce what's now known as a scheduled caste group or Jamaat. And then there were a large number of other groups whose positioning was not even known. So the Mahalanobis was to use the D-squared statistic to figure out first whether the sociological interpretations of the hierarchy of these groups stands out with respect to body dimensions, and whether he can discover where these groups were positioned in the social hierarchy. Again, like I said, that I'm not going to give you the details of it. What he said, number one, among the groups forming the main sequence, there is a close correspondence between social status and resemblance to Brahmins. So resemblance was measured using body dimensions and using the D-squared statistic. He also said that there are a number of cases, discovered a number of cases where, contrary to sociological explanation, physical explanation did not jive with those or was not consistent with that. He was also very concerned about use of these terms like Brahmins and so on and so forth. So he wanted to discontinue or not use those terms because they were value-loaded. So he said that we adopted a neutral word group, which is what he did. And then he actually went on to define what he meant by the group. And this is not the UP anthropometric survey. Subsequent to the anthropometric survey of the United Provinces, he undertook another major survey in Bengal. And this is in Bengal anthropometric survey, the word group was used, a neutral word group was used, and the Bengal anthropometric survey followed the UP anthropometric survey. And this is the Bengal anthropometric survey. Incidentally, I'm not going to talk about this. Sankhya was a journal that was founded by P.C. Mahalanobis in 1933. The foreword to Sankhya was actually written by Rabindranath Tagore, the first volume, first issue. And this became one of the major statistical journals in the world, and it still remains as a well-known statistical journal globally. This is where Mahalanobis published many of these papers, and then goes on to say things like a term like Brahmins of Bengal has to be used with some caution because the hierarchy is not, they're not at the top of the hierarchy, social hierarchy using body dimensions. So he, in the context of all of this, he also formulated what's called cluster analysis. So you use this distance measure, d squared, and then you would have, when you have multiple groups, you have pairwise distances. So you have a distance matrix. Using this distance matrix, he actually formulated some ways of finding clusters of populations that were more similar to the other clusters. So another interesting feature is that sometimes there is closer resemblance between caste groups within a district than between individuals of the same caste group belonging to different districts. So here is a case where geography plays a more dominant role than social status. So the same caste group can be more different than two caste groups belonging to two social strata if they belong to the same geographical region. So those were some of the interesting observations that were brought out by the Bengal Anthropometric Survey. But Mahalanobis was very disillusioned because the level of detail that he wanted, the level of inference that he wanted to draw from these kinds of studies, he could not do it. It was kind of, many of these inferences were kind of wishy-washy, and he was quite dissatisfied with anthropometry. And he because anthropometry is actually not completely innate. Much of it is impacted on by the environment, by the diet, and so on and so forth. So it's nothing innate or largely not completely innate, and therefore the ancestries and all of that will be impacted upon by the environment, and so you get oftentimes wishy-washy answers. So he said that anthropometry alone cannot tell the tale. We have to supplement by other physical, genetic, and serological data. Then it's a long story after then. The first department of hematology was set up in the Indian Statistical Institute as a result or as a fallout of this particular observation. Later, that hematology unit was to graduate to a human genetics unit, and people like me made a lifetime of a career, because of this particular statement, trying to understand genetics of populations and population structure in India and its relationship to the world population. All right, so that's about it regarding d squared and its applications. Mahalanobis did various other things. He was very interested in flood research. He was actually interested in data-driven inferences, and there were disastrous floods in North Bengal in 1922 and in Orissa in 1926. Mahalanobis was called upon to investigate the causes of these floods. He actually gathered a lot of data on rainfall and catchment areas and flooding of the basins and so on and so forth, which were all because of natural phenomena. And then he used that data in order to model. And ultimately, whatever he modeled, he came to certain conclusions based on his analysis of the data using these models. And there was the kind of inferences that he drew were at variance with the kind of inferences that engineers had drawn in order to contain floods in Bengal and in Orissa. His results, the engineer said, raise the embankments of the rivers, and Mahalanobis instead said that improve the drainage, make the rivers more deep, so that the water will flow out rather than go over the embankment. And just by raising the embankment after a certain period of time, if there is siltation, then it's again going to overflow the embankment, and that's not the solution. So Mahalanobis and he actually provided data in order to show that improving drainage would help contain the floods. And his calculations later formed the basis of the Hirakud Dam and the Damodar Valley Corporation. So that was Mahalanobis. Data-driven inferences. This is not his subject, but then again, this is where he had gone. The last part of my discourse on what Mahalanobis had done in terms of the science, hardcore science, as opposed to policy making. This is probably the last segment that I want to tell you. Large-scale sample survey. So when you have a large population and you want to draw some inferences about the population, usually you don't have the time and money to take data from every single unit in the population. This can be a population of schools, can be a population of ants, can be a population of human beings, whatever. Usually you draw a sample and you draw a representative sample of the population, gather data from that representative sample and draw inferences about the population. So from the sample, you want to draw inferences about the population. Mahalanobis actually contributed to this. He provided methodologies as to how you should draw a representative sample. How do you test that your representative sample is actually a good sample? So he floated the idea of pilot surveys. You, in order to even identify what sample size would you need in order to get a robust estimate of something, you need some idea about the variation in the parameter, in the variable that you're looking at. And those kinds of data in terms of estimates of the amount of variance or standard deviation in the variable that you're looking at, oftentimes you do not have. So you use pilot surveys in order to get estimates of that, and so then you can design a proper survey with a much better foothold, much better understanding based on these pilot survey results. He also devised a method of what's called interpenetrating network of subsamples. That's a method of subsampling which has a built-in method of validation. Oftentimes you discover something and then that because of various kinds of nuances, because of lots of variability in the variables that you're looking at, the discovery is oftentimes fraught with error. So you need to validate your discoveries, and then you usually draw an independent sample from that same population and see if your discovery will pan out, will validate. But Mahalanobis actually devised a method by which you don't really need an independent sample in order to validate. It is kind of built in through this interpenetrating network of subsamples. So he made lots of contributions to large-scale sample surveys. He actually wrote a 112-page paper in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society in 1944. And this particular paper became the basis of his being elected as a fellow of the Royal Society for his outstanding contributions to statistics, particularly in the field of large-scale sample surveys. So Mahalanobis contributed to multivariate analysis, which is least-squared statistic, contributed to large-scale sample surveys. So these are the major theoretical contributions of Mahalanobis, but he had lots of applications. He incidentally was also what's it called? The Alipur Observatory, the chief of the Alipur Observatory. Hotelling had Aaron Hotelling is a very famous statistician. He goes on to say good things about Mahalanobis' sample surveys and techniques that propounded. Mahalanobis was elected the chairman of the UN Subcommission on Sampling, and the subcommission recommended extending sampling methods all over the world. So it started in India, but it was now through the United Nations. It was disseminated. These concepts and methods were disseminated throughout the world. So we wrote something in the Encyclopedia of Biostatistics about Mahalanobis, and this is what we concluded: innovation, systematization, and concrete applications are the hallmarks of the kind of applied statistics practiced by Mahalanobis. I will now turn to the trust. This is the trust deed of Mahalanobis Trust. Mahalanobis formed a trust, and it said to promote the advancement of knowledge of statistics and other branches of natural and social sciences and technology for the national development of India and welfare of the people of India. And also said that statistics must clearly have a defined purpose. One aspect of which is scientific advance, which is what I've talked about, and the other human welfare and national development, which is what I'm going to talk to you about in the next 15 minutes. Planning for national development in 1940. Jawaharlal Nehru, as the chairman of the National Planning Committee, there was no planning commission at that time. In 1940, it was called the Planning Committee, and Nehru was not yet the Prime Minister, obviously. And he was chairman of the National Planning Committee, and he asked Mahalanobis to prepare a statistical commentary on the National Planning Committee reports. The National Planning Committee would come up with reports from time to time, and he asked Mahalanobis to prepare a statistical commentary. In 1949, which of course Mahalanobis did, as a result, Mahalanobis was appointed the chairman of the National Income Committee. the National Planning Committee, of course, had a major component on national income, and he was in 1949, he was appointed the chairman. Mahalanobis lamented the fact that he did not understand economics very well. National income and all of these are economic concepts. He said that I only had big ideas of planning, and those concepts are used in planning. I only had big ideas of planning from 1950. When I first started handling national income data, I began to learn. So it's almost learning on the job and framing national policies being a student. So that was very interesting. And this is a letter that he had written in 1954 to the Chandra Fund. And then goes on to say, to be quite frank, I'm so ignorant about academic economics, and my Indian colleagues have been so cocksure about their own infallibility that I had a little bit of an inferiority complex about the economic matters. So he was taking a dig, I'm pretty sure, at his Indian colleagues, the economists of India, because they were absolutely cocksure about what they were saying. Mahalanobis' biographer, Dr. would note he was highly distrustful of professional economists and openly declared total disregard to theoretical economics. Mahalanobis, incidentally, was a data-driven person. Mahalanobis took an unconventional approach to planning that found support in Joan Robinson. Joan Robinson, incidentally, was one of the same PhD advisor. Mahalanobis took an unconventional approach to planning. He was asked to provide inputs for the second plan, for the second 5-year plan of India, and that's where Mahalanobis took an unconventional approach. I'll just give you a brief idea about the unconventional approach that he took. So he essentially took the entire economy and divided it into 4 parts, 4 sectors. Investment goods industries, factory organized consumer goods industries, small-scale household industries, service industries. This sector 3, small-scale household industries, consumer goods, was subsequently divided into 2 subsectors. One was agriculture, the other was household or handicraft industries. So this conceptualization that an economy can be subdivided into 4 kind of disjoint sectors. And then what he set out to do is to say that this is the total national outlay for all of the sectors combined, and this is what my target will be for the next year. This is where I want to go, where I stand today, and this is where I want to go, and this is my total outlay for improvement of the economy. It turned out, and he wrote out these equations, etc., etc. Incidentally, the set of equations had more parameters than the number of equations, so you couldn't get unique solutions, and therefore there was room to play around. And he played around, and it was done using methods that constrained optimization methods. And for this, operations research is used, and he set up an operations research unit in institute. And he also took a physical planning approach. He said that when I try to improve my economy, I'm not going to do this in monetary terms. I'm going to do it in physical terms. So it depends on which particular sector you're looking at. If you're looking at the industry sector, mining sector, I would say that I want to improve. Today I stand here, I want 2 billion or 2 million more tons of coal to be mined. So physical planning approach was something that he had taken, and economists usually don't take a physical planning approach. They would convert this to monetary terms, and that's what they would use. Financial approach is what they would use. Like I said, that because of these constrained optimization problems that he had to deal with, he actually set up an operations research unit in the Indian Statistical Institute that worked very closely with the National Sample Survey Organization. Again, something that was his creation, followed from large-scale sample surveys that he had done. The National Sample Survey Organization still exists. It's no longer a part of the Indian Statistical Institute. It was given away to the government of India for independent governance, and the National Sample Survey Organization carries out household surveys and collects data, annual data on various kinds of parameters that are important for understanding how we are doing in terms of various factors of the society. So this was working with the NSSO, the Central Statistical Organization. Again, Mahalanobis had a large role to play in the establishment of the National Statistical Organization and the National Income Unit of ISI. So this is what his unconventional approach was, and this is taking various organizations in order to draft the plan frame. So he went on to say, and this particular journal, this is called the House Journal of the Indian Statistical Institute, he went on to say that statistics without planning has no fruit, and planning without statistics has no root. This is something that he said, and therefore he was completely data-driven and statistical. On March 17, 1955, Mahalanobis and I.G. Patel they together submitted the plan frame. It was called the Draft Recommendations for the Formulation of the Second Five-Year Plan. The Times of India on 23rd June 1955 wrote, this is the single most significant document on Indian planning. On September 11th, 1955, Mahalanobis went on to address in the All India Radio and explain the plan strategy to the listeners of the radio. And at that time, there was no TV, so most everybody was listening to the radio. J.B.S. Haldane, who was a polymath, a biologist, a founder of population genetics, later renounced his British citizenship, came to India, took Indian citizenship, joined the Indian Statistical Institute. He went on to say that even if one is pessimistic, there is a 50% chance for a success of the plan frame, which will alter the whole history of the world for the better. So this is what people are talking about in terms of the plan frame. However, Jawaharlal Nehru also was gaga about this. He called it the horoscope of Mother India and went on to say that it is based not on positions of the planets, but on the circumstances of the country and pulse of the people. So there were lots of people who were, who were gaga about the second plan. The first 5-year plan was hurriedly done. It was hurriedly done by K. N. Raj, who had graduated from the London School of Economics, had come back to India, was only 27 years old at that time, and he proposed the first 5-year plan of India. It's amazing that the country could rely on a 27-year-old kid, so to say, for the first plan of the country, first 5-year plan of the country. There was widespread hunger at that time, and reduction of hunger was the major priority of the first 5-year plan. The hunger was a fallout of the Second World War. It was exacerbated by the partition of India. The food situation was really precarious. Grow more food campaigns were going on, rising prices of food, large imports of food grains had to be done, and so on. So agriculture had to be the top priority of the first 5-year plan. And here again, Mahalanobis took a complete orthogonal departure from agriculture to industry. His point was that heavy industries had to be done within India. Otherwise, you'll just keep importing machines for manufacturing machines or manufacturing other kinds of stuff. So he laid great emphasis on heavy industries. He doubled the public investment, at least proposed doubling of the public investment, reduced investment in agriculture, proposed increased public spending in industries, producing steel, machine tools, and chemicals. So he wanted India to become self-reliant on these heavy industries and chemicals. New York Times on 16th of May stated that this is one of Asia's most important political and economic adventures. There was, of course, disdain for consumer industry. There was a major thrust on heavy industries and machines, manufacture of machines for building more machines. And Nikhil Menon, who actually wrote an interesting book published this year called Planning Democracy, says that this particular plan was actually delaying consumer gratification because consumer industry was not given a priority. It was delaying consumer gratification, and this delay of people who accepted the delay of consumer gratification were branded as patriots. So delay of consumer gratification was cast as a patriotic duty. Nehru then went on to support Mahalanobis and said that you can't build future on Coca-Cola, meaning that it can't be a consumer-based industry. You had to have much greater strength in your own system so that you could produce heavy industry. Many economists were euphoric about the second 5-year plan that included V.K.R.B. Rao, K. N. Raj, the first proponent of the first 5-year plan, who emphasized agriculture, and in spite of the fact that Mahalanobis actually paid less attention to agriculture, K. N. Raj was still gaga about the second 5-year plan, took no who at later point of time had other things to say about Mahalanobis, was actually quite supportive of the second five-year plan. There were many who were hypercritical. One of them, P.R. Shenoy, C.S. Vakil, P.R. Ramananda, they were all members of the Planning Commission at that time, and they were hypercritical, and they even said that this is an anti-national strategy and branded Mahalanobis as a CIA agent. So as you can see that there was a divided opinion, but the opinion was much more strong in favor of Mahalanobis' second plan frame as opposed to the opponents or as opposed to first plan frame. The question that one has, if a second five-year plan a thundering success? The short answer to that is no, it wasn't. And why wasn't it a thundering success? Well, most of the reserves were used up during the first plan, most of the foreign exchange reserves that we had, because there were people who were dying of hunger, and you had to import food grains, and you're using up your foreign exchange reserves. And Mahalanobis started with a doubling of public investment. And where would that money come from? So the entire plan, all of those equations, the estimates, etc., went berserk, and imports considerably outpaced exports. And because your foreign exchange, there was a foreign exchange crunch, the second five-year plan had to be scaled back. He had set targets, but the targets could only be met if there was doubling of public investment, or if the public investment increased significantly, but the public investment could not increase significantly because of the foreign exchange crunch, and therefore all of the targets had to be pulled back. So essentially, it was not a thundering success, even though conceptually it was a major breakthrough, but ultimately, when it was implemented, because of extraneous problems, it wasn't a thundering success. The third five-year, be that as it may, in spite of the fact that the second five-year plan was not a thundering success, what did the third five-year plan do? It was just a continuation of the second five-year plan, which again bolsters the opinion that the second five-year plan, at least conceptually in terms of the way plan process was approached, was just absolutely fantastic, and they continued to hold on to those concepts and methods in order to formulate this, the third five-year plan. The third five-year plan was authored principally by Pitambar Pant, and Pitambar Pant, as I mentioned earlier, was a great friend of Mahalanobis as well. And so many of us think that Mahalanobis actually, from the shadows, was actually influencing Pitambar Pant as well. Mahalanobis wrote a letter to Pitambar Pant at that time, and he brought out a matter, and he stated that matter deserved serious attention at an early date. And what was that matter is what I want to mention to you, that Mahalanobis met von Neumann in Princeton. He visited Princeton in March 1946 and had met von Neumann. And of course, von Neumann was then building a computer and a digital computer and so on and so forth. And Mahalanobis realized that for planning, you had to gather so much data, and to be able to analyze that data and make an impact on planning process, you need to analyze that data rapidly, and without a computer, you could not do that. So he realized that it was essential to build up at least one first-rate computation and calculating laboratory. This is what he called it in India. And von Neumann actually promised that. Von Neumann was building a computer then, and he promised Mahalanobis. Mahalanobis actually asked whether a computer could be built in India. Von Neumann assured Mahalanobis that he couldn't assure that it could be built in India, but at least assured Mahalanobis that after he built the first computer, he would actually send one to India. Mahalanobis soon realized that the costs of acquiring the computer would be enormous, and India could not afford to actually buy such a computer. So he established, this is a strange guy, he established the electronics laboratory and workshop in Einstein in 1950. And in 1953, the first analog computer, which was capable of solving a set of simultaneous equations, was actually invented in India, fabricated in India, and was put to use. Later, of course, the Indian Statistical Institute became the de facto national computing laboratory of the National Computing Center in India. It had procured X2M from UK. Ural in 1958 from the Soviet Union. Later it acquired IBM 1401. So when I joined the Statistical Institute, we initiated our work on programming on IBM 1401. Later, Indian Statistical Institute, in collaboration with the Jabalpur University, actually built a digital computer, and that computer still exists in the exhibition hall at ISI. TIFR at that time had also built a computer, and that was called TIFRAC, TIFR Automatic Computer. And now tussle started between Hawa and Mahalanobis. Mahalanobis had already become the de facto national computer center, but Hawa wasn't able to accept that. And so again, this is another story for another complete lecture. The relationship between Hawa and Mahalanobis that started with the tussle between TIFR and ISI as to who will become the national computing center. Neither one, by the way. There was a completely separate national computing center that was set up. This was the last piece of work that PC Mahalanobis had done, and this is called Fractal Graphical Analysis. The problem that he was trying to solve here is to look at disparities in various kinds in any trait. Let's say income. How do you measure disparity? And this is egalitarian. So this is don't worry about what the two axes are. They will change depending on what variable you're looking at. And this 45-degree angle is egalitarian, and any deviation from that egalitarian line will actually mean that the country, the nation, has an inordinate amount of disparity. So the greater the deviation, the larger the disparity. So he devised the method of doing these kinds of graphs, catching hold of data and actually drawing these graphs appropriately, and also measuring how you could measure the disparity between this egalitarian line from what you actually observe having collected data. This is called fractal graphical analysis. It was put to use initially in economic areas in the context of planning, etc. And but ultimately, right now, fractal graphical analysis is used in many other domains of science as well. So as you could see that Mahalanobis actually, provided a huge amount of made a huge amount of contributions to science, especially statistical science. He actually, like I said, that he actually founded and formulated the large-scale sample surveys for which he is most well known. D-squared, which is most applied in all domains of science and various other things, control. And wherever he went, he was just an innovative, fantastic mind. And wherever he went, whatever he touched, there was some kind of innovation that he did. So I'll end my talk here. Well, he also set up the Department of Statistics in Calcutta University. He was a meteorologist at the Alipur Observatory from 1922 to 1926. And interesting, I don't know if I have that. Even when he was a meteorologist, one of the questions was, where do you study? At what height from the surface of the Earth do you study in order to predict rainfall with great certainty? What was the seat of cloud seeding? And again, meteorologists or weather people who were studying climate, they had some kind of notion, and that notion was completely changed because Mahalanobis collected data at different layers, at different heights from the surface of the Earth, and was able to show that, I think it's about, no, I won't hazard a guess, I forgot. Whatever, some height from the surface of the Earth is where the center of action is, which if you study, you can predict rainfall. This is the last picture of Mahalanobis before he passed away. This is Rani Mahalanobis, and this is in their house in Baranagar called Amrapali. Raghunath named the house as Amrapali. Raghunath was to visit that house, but Raghunath passed away. This is the last picture that we have of Mahalanobis. He passed away. She was admitted to a city nursing home and passed away. But his life can be summed up in this nation. Not armies, not nations have advanced the race. But here and there in the course of ages, an individual has stood up and cast his shadow on the world, over the world. So Mahalanobis was one such person who cast his shadow over the world. And I hope that I've been able to give you some inkling of that, and I hope that you find this life exciting. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Professor, for highlighting this very interesting life of Professor Mahalanobis. So, can we take a few questions?
So you said Rabindranath and Mahalanobis, they were joint secretary.
Yes.
So Rabindranath took a lot of interest in building up the Sri Niketan. And what was really the role of Mahalanobis?
Mahalanobis set it up, not Rabindranath.
Okay.
So I actually have written on contribution on Sri. I can send you a. And Uma Dasgupta has very recently just written a book on Sri Niketan.
Yeah.
The Sri Niketan experiment was by Rabindranath, but Mahalanobis played a great role there. And as a matter of fact, Mahalanobis replicated Sri Niketan in ISI to a certain extent. So when we joined ISI had cows, cow sheds, and all those kinds of things. Vegetable gardens no longer exist. So when we joined there as students, I often wondered, why is there cows in the Statistical Institute or a vegetable garden? And this was all, kind of. In one sense, you are right that Rabindranath and two other persons whose names I forget, Rabindranath actually sent them to Iowa in order to farming and all of that. And they brought back those concepts and implemented that in those in Sri Niketan. But again, I mean, I can't weigh whose contributions were more, but Mahalanobis also played a great role.
So that was all before they drifted away.
I think the drifting away was over a period of time. After all, he was the son of the father, right? and so he had to have a greater say. But I shudder to make this statement, but I will make it. I think intellectually Mahalanobis was much brighter. So in some ways, Mahalanobis was at an edge over him, but he couldn't forget that he was the son of the father. So inevitable happened.
Okay.
Yeah, more questions.
Thank you for the talk, sir. Could you please tell me the stand of Professor Mahalanobis related to the conflict between investment on agriculture and industry at that period of time?
Well, there was really no conflict. As I just mentioned, that A.N. Raj, who actually invested in agriculture, was gaga about the second five-year plan, which put agriculture below the emphasis on agriculture below heavy industry. So I don't think there was any conflict. A.N. Raj had no choice. The country was reeling with hunger. So what else would he do? You can't eat machines, right? So, and Mahalanobis thought that you can keep on farming, but you have to import everything. Wherever manufacturing is required, you need to import everything. So instead of agriculture, he laid emphasis on heavy industry. I don't think there was really any conflict between the two.
Any more questions? Yeah.
Could you please say a few words on Prasanta Chandra's contribution in shaping up today's Bangladesh and Pakistan's economic policies and their plans?
I don't know.
His influence, because then he was from Dhaka and.
Yeah, but I don't think, at least I have not read that he had any influence.
Okay.
No, I don't think he had any influence. That is not that I know of.
Because he was doing then something which was influencing the entire subcontinent.
No,
So,
these methodologies certainly were taken, not just in countries around us, but were actually adopted by countries far away. And one of the ways that he was operating, or he was able to operate, now it doesn't exist. The Indian National Science Academy used to have a post called Foreign Secretary. And the Foreign Secretary was in charge of inviting people from all over the world. And Mahalanobis took advantage of that. For years, he was the Foreign Secretary. He would invite at INSA's expense and bring those people over to Barakut. So, Charles Bethlehem and all of these people who came to Barakut when he was formulating the second 5-year plan, Mahalanobis did not spend a pie. It was spent by the Indian National Science Academy. So that worked out very well in his favor.
Thank you. I have a question. The time when he was statistically distributing the cost, the wrong gains of others, at that point of time, the social taboo was very high. So how that was accepted? His research.
Well, accepted meaning what? It was. I don't think it impacted on policy in any way. It was more fundamental questions that they were asking. Like, for example, was geography more important in shaping your physical dimension than your ancestry? That's the kind of questions they're asking, right? At that time, you're right that there was a lot of social taboo, but I don't think these percolated to policy level kinds of things. No, I don't.
Socially, were they accepted, or people were aware of that kind of research going on?
I wouldn't be able to tell. Honestly, I would not be able to tell how well these results were disseminated in the general public. I have no idea.
But the results were strong in the sense that
very strong, very strong. The results were very, very strong, and but then again, I think it remained confined to anthropologists primarily, who were not necessarily shaping governance. So I don't think that these findings had an impact on. I wish it did. We would be better off today, but I don't think that it had a major impact.
So when you were doing this kind of research, did you find these results are kind of corroborating with what you have?
Yes, by and large. As a matter of fact, we found more strong evidence compared to the evidence, and that's understandable, and that's why the lament that we should go for those that are not impacted on by the environment if you have to study ancestry. And yeah, I was a beneficiary of that, and certainly our results were much more strong. We were able to study population structure migrations in a much better way.
And in today's perspective, do you think your results stand somewhere social?
Couldn't care less. I don't think so. Who cares? These social kinds of things are shoved down your throat. So you say what you're told to say.
So thank you for some talk. I would like to ask, can you please elaborate on the root of his distrust of theoretical economics?
The role?
The root of his distrust of theoretical economics.
Look, I mean, the point is that why was he distrustful, or what impact it has? So the reason was that economics was not at that time embedded in data. It was mostly model building from your perception of the society. I mean, that's evident also in the first plan, first 5-year plan. And Mahalanobis was completely sold on data-driven inferences and policy making. So he was distrustful of theoretical economics because theoretical economists were building models devoid of data. And that's the reason for his distrust. But later, as you know, or as you may know, there are lots of economists, theoretical economists, who actually use data in order to initiate models, but then they go much beyond that. Even from a philosophical point of view, even Amartya Sen started with data and then built on this entire social choice theory, almost theoretically. So, but at that time, not many economists were. You didn't have access to data, and even if you did, the analysis was not very, was not on good ground, solid ground. So you couldn't even analyze the data to draw appropriate inferences or do model building based on the data, which Mahalanobis was, because he was the father of statistical science, he was able to do, and that's the reason I think he was distrustful.
So would you say his methodology sort of filtered into theoretical economics as it stands today?
Sorry, you didn't get the first part of your question.
would you say that his methodology filtered into theoretical economics eventually, or?
So I think economists have, over a period of time, become more conscious about the impact of data, and most economists. I'm no economist, but I, understand a little bit of what goes on in the field, and I think they have become more cognizant of the fact that if their theory is rests on data, is founded on a database, then the theory is more robust, has a lasting value. This I think people have realized. Samuelson, Milton Friedman, all of them initially, they're economists, philosophers, but the starting point was some bit of data, and that framed their mind to formulate the models.
Maybe you can ask.
Okay.
Sir,
Oh, okay.
Thank you for the talk. Could you please comment on the connection between Baba and Mahalanobis, a few words?
I really don't want to, because if I make a comment in passing, it won't be deep, and it might convey a wrong meaning. That is a very interesting relationship, and I rather not make a fleeting statement on their relationship. It was love and hate.
Anyone from the online audience, if you have any question, you may please raise your hand and you can ask the question. So I don't think so. So let's thank Professor.
Thank you very much.
For the